Time now for some fantasy winners and losers from week number 10. And Dak Prescott was an absolute stud. Keenan Allen continues to be just an absolute monster. TJ Hockenson loves his new quarterback in Josh Dobbs. And Brian Robinson, the receiver, was on display against Seattle. Did a nice job running the ball as well. But the Commanders running back had a big day catching the ball, 119 yards receiving and a touchdown. As you see the top respective performances at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end for week number 10. I'm Jamey Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings going over some winners and losers from week 10, helping you out with a little waiver wire information as well. But Heath, let's start with the winners. I'll give you my list first. And a couple guys in Arizona looked pretty good with the quarterback back, and that was Kyler Murray making his 2023 debut and connecting with Trey McBride. Obviously, Kyler did not have a huge statistical game. We'll get to him in a second, but McBride was an absolute stud. 9 targets, 8 catches, 131 yards receiving, and 21 PPR points. Jahmyr Gibbs, you know what? He can coexist with David Montgomery. It's fun to see both Lions running backs have a lot of success there, especially Gibbs scoring 2 touchdowns and outscoring Montgomery 2-1. And Noah Brown just continues to be a star, going to be one of the best waiver wire additions, especially as long as Nico Collins is out. He's got over 300 yards receiving in his last 2 games. Continue to do a great job there for C.J. Stroud. But Kyler Murray looked good in his return. Did not have a big fantasy day, but the 33 yards rushing was impressive. And he probably ran for about 100 yards more when you factor in all the times and how far he drops back. But the rushing touchdown was nice. Should have had over 20 fantasy points if Michael Wilson caught it in the end zone, as he probably should have, if Marquise Brown had come down with the touchdown, or maybe they gave him the tush push instead of Clayton Tune. But good to see Kyler Murray back and doing Kyler Murray things.
It was good to see Geno Smith look like someone you could start against good matchups. Like, we weren't even sure that was possible. The 27 points against the Washington Commanders will give us more hope the next time that Geno Smith faces a good matchup. I think Christian Kirk pretty clearly now established as the #1 wide receiver over Calvin Ridley for Jacksonville. That makes him a winner. TJ Hockenson absolutely loves Joshua Dobbs, who just continues to pepper him with targets. Hockenson might be the #1 tight end in fantasy for the rest of the season, but the biggest winner has to be Bijan Robinson. Thank you, Arthur Smith. A season career high 22 rush attempts for Robinson, and several of those came inside the 10-yard line, including the rushing touchdown. This is exactly the type of usage, at least in the running game, that we were hoping for when the Falcons used a top 10 pick on Robinson. Now, if we can see a few more targets as well, that'd be even better. This gives me hope that Robinson can be the top 12 running back that we drafted him to be for the rest of the season.
It's unfortunate that he's going into his bye in week 11 because we want to see more of Bijan Robinson. But you know what? We probably want to see a little bit less of Kyle Pitts as we transition to the losers and the guy who might be dropped in several leagues. I'll start with my list of guys that have been a little disappointing, certainly in week number 10. And Trevor Lawrence, oh my goodness, what has happened to him? Breece Hall, we were expecting a huge game against the Raiders. Not so much, as you see here, 28 rushing yards, 47 receiving yards. That kind of saved the day a little bit, but 9 PPR points, just not what we were expecting from one of the best running backs in football. Deontay Johnson, he was on such an impressive roll, and then here comes the Packers defense. No, really more so I think the Steelers rushing offense, but Deontay Johnson only 4 targets, very disappointing. 1 catch, 17 yards. He should bounce back in week 11 against the Browns. And then the aforementioned Kyle Pitts, once again, is just like he's a staple on this list. 5 targets, 3 catches, 30 yards. Quarterback issues continue for the Falcons as Taylor Heineke suffered a hamstring injury, did not finish the game. Desmond Ridder came into the game, but really it was about Bijan Robinson leading the way for the Falcons on the offensive side of the ball. Pitts, again, will probably be dropped in a lot of leagues. And so might Trevor Lawrence. Just a terrible game in a tough loss against San Francisco 49ers, but 185 passing yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 7 rushing yards. He's been a bad fantasy quarterback all season long, and this sort of summarizes just how bad he has been. Only 2 games over 20 fantasy points. It is going to be interesting to see how fantasy managers approach him in 1 quarterback leagues in week 11 because it's a dream matchup against the Titans. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks have a ton of success against that Tennessee defense. I just don't think you can trust Trevor Lawrence at this point. So one of the bigger busts, regardless of position, certainly one of the bigger busts at quarterback, and Trevor Lawrence just, again, disappointing fantasy managers.
I know one of the bigger busts in terms of guys who were drafted in round 1 or round 2 has to be Tony Pollard. Just another miserable outing for Pollard. Absolutely nothing in the passing game. A fantastic matchup and game script against the Giants, and he gets outscored by his teammate Rico Dowdle. I think you're probably still starting Pollard this week against the Carolina Panthers, but if it's another game like this, I don't know how we can start him after that. Jacoby Myers looks like a big loser with all the touches for the Raiders going to either Josh Jacobs or Devontae Adams. We like it that that way. Jacoby Myers doesn't. K-Dot, and we were hopeful for him to kind of build on what he'd been doing recently. He's going back to the waiver wire now. And then Will Levis, a fantastic debut with 4 touchdown passes against the Atlanta Falcons. Since then, he's thrown for 262 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick against the Steelers. Now 199 yards, no touchdowns, and a pick against the Tampa Bay defense that looked like a free space of a matchup. He's had a passer rating below 70 in each of these last 2 games. You can't use Levis as anything more than a desperation start in a 2-quarterback league.
Yeah, very tough to trust him, which unfortunately means very tough to trust DeAndre Hopkins as well. So we'll see how they do against the Jaguars, although Brock Purdy just beat them up for 3 touchdowns. We'll see if Will Levis might have some success, but I doubt anybody's going to trust him. You have to replace Will Levis, maybe Trevor Lawrence, maybe some guys in the bye like Kyle Pitts. Let's show you the waiver wire options for you. Here are the top 10 players that we're looking at. We'll get into more in depth on this on Tuesday. But you got a couple Texans at the top, and then maybe a new running back in Minnesota, not because Alexander Madison is getting benched, but he did suffer a concussion in the Week 10 win over New Orleans, so he might not be available for Week 11 against Denver. They've already added a running back in Myles Gaskin, so probably a sign that Madison might not be ready to go. So Chandler's going to be very popular, but you see some other options here for you. Some wide receivers, mostly Demario Douglas, worth holding on his bye. We'll get into that a little bit more. But let's talk about the Texans, guys, Heath, because Noah Brown, again, over 320 yards receiving in his last 2 games. We know Nico Collins dealing with that calf injury. We don't know when he's going to return. With the way C.J. Stroud is playing, obviously Tank Dell is a must-start player at this point. Noah Brown, however, not far behind him. So really coming on the last couple of weeks. Hopefully continues in a good matchup against Arizona. And maybe we found a running back in Houston. They've been a miserable team running the ball all season long. The worst team coming into Week 10. However, Devin Singletary goes for a huge game as they beat the Bengals. We'll see if Devin Singletary can keep it going one more time. But definitely these are 2 guys worth adding, along with Ty Chandler, who could be the starting running back for the Vikings.
Yeah, and if I miss out on the Texans, if I miss out on Ty Chandler, I'm looking at those rookie wide receivers. You said it, Demario Douglas heading into his bye week. I still want to add and stash him. I view him as a number 3 wide receiver rest of season and the best wide receiver on the Patriots, no matter who is healthy. Also want to make sure that Quentin Johnston, who just scored his first NFL touchdown, is on my roster. Jaden Reed, who might just be the best Packers wide receiver rest of season. We have no idea who that is. Another guy who needs to be rostered. Go get those rookie wide receivers. We talk about it in July and August, how you might have to be patient with them. They're generally better in the second half than the first half. Well, we're at the second half of the season now, and we're starting to see these guys emerge.
I hope for the sake of Demario Douglas, we get a solidified quarterback situation in New England, whether it's Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi, just so we know who's going to be throwing him passes. All right, we got a game Monday night between the Broncos and the Bills. Let's do some DFS lineups to help people win some money, maybe salvage their fantasy season for redraft leagues. Just to give you a little tidbits of information there on players that we like. Here's my lineup on FanDuel. I'm going to go with a Bills stack. I think Josh Allen comes out throwing and tries to, sort of calm the nerves of Buffalo Bills fans and maybe fantasy managers who are dealing with some struggles with the way that this team has gone and the season has gone in Buffalo. But connecting with Gabe Davis, we know he's tough to trust, but has been better at home than on the road. Good matchup against Denver. Dalton Kincaid's been an absolute stud. I think that continues against this Broncos defense. Tyler Bass to just give you a cheap option there, because if they do stall in the red zone, they'll kick some field goals and then bring it back on the other side with at least one member of the Broncos. Jerry Jeudy's been playing much better of late. Hopefully he does continue to beat up this Bills secondary, which has definitely struggled since the loss of Tre'Davious White.
Well, the Bills stack makes a lot of sense, but I'm trying to win a big pot here. Let's go with the Broncos stack. Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Javonte Williams. You get the top 2 wide receivers and the quarterback and his number 1 running back. It's a fantastic stack here against a Bills defense that hasn't been all that special ever since they got so injured. The only Bill I am playing, Khalil Shakir. I think you need 20 from him tonight to beat me in our Dynasty League. This will be my consolation. When you do, I get to make a little money.
Well, let's go Khalil Shakir. I hope to have a big game from him. And see, there's different ways you can go. You can go a Bill stack, a Bronco stack, as long as you're winning money. We'll be happy, you'll be happy, and you'll be happy checking out our Fantasy Football Today podcast as well. We help you dominate your fantasy leagues, and you can find it wherever podcasts are available. You also can check us out on our YouTube page, but make sure you're downloading and listening to the Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found.